if we take a step back, just like the spreadsheet was a killer app to launch the PC era, and then the browser was the killer app to kind of unlock the whole internet. Initially, the techie and the geeks that were really into the technology were the ones that adopted the technology early. But as it tried to go more mainstream, more ubiquitous, you actually have to abstract a lot of it. If you think about crypto, it's going to follow the same pattern.
Today, we are sitting down with MoneyGram CEO Anthony Soohoo, who recently announced MGUSD, a dollar-backed stablecoin integrated into its global network and consumer app. It is designed to support cross-border payments, digital dollar access, and more for users around the world. We'll get into it today, but Anthony, welcome on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So MoneyGram has supported stablecoin-based transfers before. So it's not necessarily new on that front, but launching your own stablecoin is arguably a more strategic move, bigger, etc. So what kind of changed internally for you guys that made you decide to go down this route?
Some of the things as we learned about applications is that it's very difficult to think about stablecoin as just the asset. And when you're done, all of a sudden, you're going to get a bunch of people using it, especially outside of trading. When we took a step back, I think we had two big insights. One is that the network is the computer, which what we mean by that is that when you think about the internet, a lot of the logic, the intelligence has been moved up to the cloud. And when people are trying to deliver services to the consumer, the applications have also moved up to the cloud. But when you think about the issuance of currency and how we send money today, they're all kind of running through maybe unintelligent rails. And so what we started realizing is that we have a very specific use case, which is our consumers need to send money from one place in one country to another part of the country in a different part of the world. And that type of send, while it sounds very simple, is actually super complex. It's complex from a compliance standpoint. It's complex from AML standpoint. It's also just complex because a lot of times the transparency in terms of the status of where things are being sent are not as transparent as you would like it to be. So taking a step back, we realized that stablecoin, specifically an MGUSD that we can control, would allow us to put intelligence in our payments network. And we see it as kind of the foundational step for us to build many other applications on top, but using that as one of the intelligence layers around distribution, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What type of other applications would you be building on top of it?
Well, it would be us as well as our any partners that potentially would want to build on top. But when you think about anything you want to do with contracts, you can imagine people paying a contractor back home and having certain criteria before something launches. You can see it being used for real estate transactions. I know that people have built and use our rails for payroll, for instance, where they're paying, as an example, cruise workers that live in various different areas. When you think about payroll, they actually have to send it to all these different accounts.
Right,
and so how do you do that in a very simple way? And they all have different jurisdictions, different rules about how payroll happens. And so adding that intelligence allows, I think, a different form of payment versus requiring a lot more manual work or a lot more intelligence off network, if that makes sense. And so that's why we're excited about it. And I think this is just the first step in terms of making payments more intelligent.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say is kind of the unlock here with, MoneyGram's already existing millions of customers, 500,000 retail locations, I believe. And then obviously there's the element of this global payment rail, kind of what you were touching on before too. How do you kind of think of ushering in these people and these locations in this next phase for the stablecoin adoption?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we take a step back, I think you mentioned a few things I kind of want to call out, which is at first we have we operate in 200 countries and territories. We have operate within those countries about 20,000 corridors across also 500,000 retail locations, almost 500,000. The big number that we serve across all that is actually 60 million active customers at any point in time. And so I think the very first thing is that we are starting off when we're thinking about problems to solve. We're really starting with the fact that we already have distribution, because most of the time people are creating an asset and then they're trying to figure out a distribution to push this out to drive adoption. We already have the problem that we know we want to solve. And then it's just kind of working backwards to say, if we want to serve these 60 million customers who have, a few very unique needs, either sending money back home, helping pay bills back home, helping pay tuition. Mm-hmm. In each of those use cases, how do we add more intelligence to that? Because if we can, I think we can build much more seamless, maybe much more personalized service for each of them. And so instead of starting with the asset, really starting with the distribution, working backwards, I think is maybe the unique point that we're doing. And then one other thing is this is not just a PR announcement that we have, as you mentioned, as we discussed, we've been using this for the last 5 years, but really on MGUSD, we have minted coins, and we are starting the first phase of actually distributing that out in our network. So that's the exciting part to see. And then now it's building applications on top of those use cases that we were talking about to make sure that we deliver a seamless experience for all our consumers.
Yeah. I mean, MoneyGram is, I wouldn't say lucky because you guys built up the audience over time, but you guys are lucky in the sense that you have this massive distribution network, right? And all these millions of customers already that you guys, either interact with, they work with you guys, et cetera, however we want to frame it. Do you think they are receptive to this? Or is it something that maybe will be baked in on the back end?
I think that it depends. The answer is it depends who we're talking about. So, right. For instance, we believe that we're going to use MGUSD across every part of how we run our business, from when you think about it, running our treasury, may that be for settlement with our agents to doing FX trading. I think that's actually happening today, and we're probably on a run rate to do over $1 billion in those type of transactions for our back end. When we think about the consumers, I think it depends on the market, because you have certainly customers in some LATAM countries right now where they're actually seeking out, where they're converting their local fiat currency to try to buy US dollar. And so I think that they are, for those audiences, I think that they're going to be really excited about a product like this, because they're actually naturally doing it in the real world. And now to do it in a way that, you don't actually have to carry the physical asset, but it's actually managed digitally and it's much more portable. I think they'll be excited about that. And then I think after that, there would be a level of education to try to drive future adoption beyond those.
Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily designed for crypto native users then, right? Who would you say is the actual end user for MGUSD today? And then let's say fast forward down the line, 5-10 years, is that end user going to be the same, or do you have a vision for what it could become?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I would say is that, no, it is the answer to your question. It is not meant for the crypto native right. user today, because I think there's other services that do that for them well. And in fact, we recently signed a partnership with Kraken where they're using our off-ramp for their users, so they will still access us. We just want to be the bridge for those type of customers. MoneyGram wants to be the bridge that ties in the physical with the digital, fiat with digital currencies. These are made really for MoneyGram's core customer, which starts with really the underbanked population cross-border around the world who are trying to send money back home. And I think in those instances, that use case, they typically have not had as much access to the financial services industry, or had as much access to the financial system. So in many respects, what we're trying to do is democratize it and give them access to these known forms of currency, or we would say assets. And then I think as this thing evolves in the future, we could see this being a core part of just how we operate, and everyone's going to want to potentially have a stablecoin balance. And if that's the case, we'll be ready for it as well.
Yeah. You also brought up before that MoneyGram operates both digitally and physically. And I actually had a question written down about that, is like how important is, having that cash network and a retail footprint in onboarding people? Because you guys are unique in that sense. Like not most people who issue stablecoins have literal physical locations as well. So how does that kind of interplay with it?
We see it, we don't see a day in the future where cash completely goes away. I think that as we talk about it, there are in all across the world, especially when you get out of the US, people there's cash discounts and many economies are still run by cash. The way we view this is that MoneyGram sits at that intersection where we can actually be the translator between the two worlds. So may it be in a world where a customer has fiat currency and they want to convert it in. We have the ability to get them cashed in and bring them into the digital network and the digital financial system. And then for folks that are already crypto native, obviously with our Kraken announcement, the thing we're so excited about that partnership is giving their customers, the ability to off ramp, because even for them, they're going to want to eventually, if they outside of trading, have the ability to convert it back to cash. And doing so involves a few things. One is having physical locations. But the second thing is, in a lot of these cases, we have built a very robust compliance, KYC framework and platform that, anyone can basically plug into. And I think that that's building something like that's a lot easier said than done. And that's also, I think, a big part of our advantage that allows us to do this at scale.
Yeah. You brought up the cash discount too, and that made me think about how there was a time where, honestly, maybe we still are in that time where people don't accept cash at certain places. And I think that's maybe a very American thing. And now cash is kind of having a resurgence to the point that you're talking about, is because people don't want to have the credit card fees. They rather you pay in cash. Do you see a world where stable coins will also become the preferred method of payment, where they'll give discounts if you pay in stable coins, or, they might just take stable coins as an option for payment? How far are we from that reality?
I think that there will be a world if we can get stablecoin and get a lot of when we get this thing to scale, I think stablecoin can probably be the most efficient channel to disperse and send funds. But that being said, we have many ways that people can send funds today, from ACH to wire to you can have account deposit to debit. And guess what? Consumers choose all of them, even today. And they have different reasons why they choose it. Some people are okay waiting because they don't want to pay a lot of fees. Some people want it to be there instantaneously and they want to have better tracking. So I believe that when we're talking about payments, all of them will still exist. There will be a place for cash, but I do see stablecoin as being a very compelling use case where it could long term, when you get this to scale, where this is going to be the lowest cost way to send it in the most timely manner, where it settles instantaneously. Mm-hmm. And based on that, I could see it being, a primary use case for many different people around the world.
Yeah. In many markets too, access to stable coins is kind of the hedge against inflation or currency instability. Maybe not a hedge, but you know what I mean. Do you kind of see stable coins evolving beyond just payments and into something as a global savings infrastructure? And if so, where would you guys want to be positioned in that?
Well, certainly, I think I don't want to talk too much about future plans, but what I will say is that we do see that if you're holding it, it makes a lot of sense for a consumer to say, how do I earn rewards on my balance, which is kind of what you're getting to. But in addition to that, is there a place where MoneyGram can then help them spend that? And if they want to spend, is it the most efficient way to do it is through stablecoin? And I certainly think those are the things that will play itself out over the next year to two. But there probably is a scenario for some type of purchases where it makes a lot of sense to do that. I'll give you an example. I think when you think about travel, putting stablecoin and smart contracts associated with an Airbnb or whatever you're renting, make sure that when you show up, the place you rented looks like exactly like the image you have, actually makes a lot of sense. And a lot of times right now, when you get caught in those cases, you really depend on, I don't know, the credit card companies to say, yes, this, they are the arbiter when there's a dispute. What if both sides agree to the contract and then the funds get released out of escrow based on what was agreed to? Would be that actually be a more cost-effective way to do that in the future and in a more seamless way, because those things are built into an app. I think that those are all possibilities that will play itself out, and why, kind of going back to MGUSD, we're excited about pulling this intelligence into our network, building things on top for those reasons.
Yeah. There's also in current present day, the self-custody wallet was embedded directly into the MoneyGram app. And I wanted to ask you why you thought the route of self-custody was important for this product. And then how do you kind of make that accessible and understandable to users who have maybe never interacted with crypto or don't even know what self-custodying means in this context?
Yeah, I think when we were thinking about all the regulatory and compliance complexities around the world, rolling this stuff out in each local markets, and from a sheer scale perspective, we thought the best path to put the best power in the hand was to put this really in the hands of our customers. And what that meant was a education process. And, we have plans to educate them, and there will be a lot of communication we're going to have to go through as part of this process. But we think that it is probably the best model for us to be able to scale this framework as globally as we want to in as quick of a time if it really does take off. But there is this onus that we have to, educate the customers that we deal with to make sure that they understand that they are operating with stablecoin and how they want to manage it.
Mm-hmm. How much do you think about abstracting away from complexities?
Well,
putting it front and center. Yeah.
I started my career at Apple, so I am all about hiding the complexity from our consumers as much as possible. But we also want to, the balance of that, obviously, the responsible thing is to abstract the complexities, but understand what they're signing up for. And I think that's the balance we would be working towards. We want to get away from a lot of the terminologies I think that the industry has put out there and really explain it in plain, simple language, what we're trying to do, what they need to understand, and hopefully deliver that in as common sense language as possible rather than getting stuck on the specs and feeds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So there was a good line in the announcement that I read around blockchain infrastructure becoming quote, invisible by design, which is something I agree with. And we've talked with other guests about on the show before. But do you think maybe not just MoneyGram, but across the board, the winners of this category will be those who ultimately put it behind and consumers barely notice that it's there?
100%. If you think about every industries that's played out, actually, it's interesting because I think of stablecoin. I've talked about it a lot, where I think it is the killer app for crypto. And if we take a step back, just like the spreadsheet was a killer app to launch the PC era, and then the browser was the killer app to kind of unlock the whole internet. If you think about crypto, it's going to follow the same pattern as those, which what I mean by that is initially the techie and the geeks that were really into the technology were the ones that adopted the technology early. But as it tried to go more mainstream, more ubiquitous, you actually have to abstract a lot of it. I know when we buy a computer today, we have to kind of decide on what's the size of the screen we want, what's potentially the processor we need, and how much storage do we want, and how much weight we want these into. We want in this unit if it's a laptop. In the olden days, it was not like that. You literally had to go to Fry's and other places to buy a motherboard and said, does this motherboard work with this processor? And do I need a different IO card? And everything was kind of, you have to figure out. And that feels a little like where crypto is today, and especially around stablecoin. And I think we're going to get to a point in the future where a customer is going to say, hey, I want to settle in stablecoin. Here's the smart contract I want. And that's all they need to know. And we'll make it as easy. I don't know if it will be as easy, but the goal would be to make it as easy as swipe left or swipe right.
Do you think we're there today?
Not completely, no, because I think that there is, and the reason I believe we're not there today is that there's still some regulatory frameworks and clarity we need, I think, in terms of how we need to operate. When I think put my MoneyGram hat on where we operate against 200 countries, but I think we'll get there. And I'm excited about the day when it does, because I think the people that will win at the end will be the consumer. And I believe the promise of all this, never losing sight of it, is to democratize finance for everyone.
Yeah. How do you think about it across the regional differences in the countries? Because all of them have their own nuances, right? And I had a USDT Zero's co-founder on in like late May. And he was kind of talking about how their focus was on emerging markets. And, a lot of other stable coins have targeted maybe the other side of the spectrum, like America, Europe, Canada, so on. How do you think about MoneyGram's reach across all of these different countries and the regional differences at play when you want to, I guess, like target these different markets in a way that meets them where they're at? Does that make sense?
So if I think about it this way, the question that you're asking is a very complex question because every country is different.
We're going to run through all 200 now.
Yeah, exactly. But what I will say is that, look, from the consumer standpoint, what they want in terms of payments and their finances is they want to save time in terms of managing it. They want to have convenience. So they want to save effort and they want to save money and they want it to be low cost. What the governments typically want is they want to have some level of control over their currency to make sure there's not a lot of, where they can actually control some value in the currency that they use to manage their own economy, or else it would be chaos. And I do think they also want to understand that the monies that are coming in and out are done for legitimate reasons. From when you think about it from a safety standpoint, that it's not being used for illicit bad stuff. And so I think all those play into the fact that if you had something that was more intelligent, something that was more trackable, and something that I think was more programmable across the board, it would benefit everyone as long as it follows some of these the regulatory frameworks that a lot of these countries are asking for. So I do think that if we play out across these 200 countries, there will be the people in LATAM, in a specific country in LATAM, will be more receptive because they want to hold currency in USD. There will be other folks in other markets that love stablecoin because of the real-time settlement nature of it at low cost. And then there will be, and those probably will be around in some of the European countries, I'm guessing. And there will be others where they love the fact that they can turn this programmable money idea into contracts where they can release funds after it's been verified. So I think all of those are going to be different markets, but the premise is to make really money smarter and more accessible for everyone. I think is going to be the universal thing that binds it all together.
Mm-hmm. Do you see stablecoin wallets or stablecoins in general just like eventually competing? No, actually the wallets competing with local bank accounts in some regions then? Or are they more complementary to the traditional banking system?
I think it'll be more complementary. I don't know about you, but I have a number of credit cards, even though we talked about,
I got a few.
I think it's going to work the same way because, and there's a few reasons for that. Some of the psychology will be that you want to have actually multiple accounts because you don't want to hold something in one place all at the same time in case for safety reasons, it gets hacked or something happens, we don't get access to it for a short period of time. So you want to be a little bit more diversified. I also think that there's going to be different use cases where cash, for instance, is going to be better for some spending. There's going to be some purchases you're going to make because you want high rewards or points that you're going to use a traditional credit card. And there's going to be stuff that you want the lowest fees charged to you. But you want to do it in the most efficient way instead of carrying on, a bag of money. And I think those are going to be like things that work really well for stablecoin too. So I think this is an and thing versus an or that we need to make for consumers.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about kind of the relationships that you put together on the front of MGUSD. And what I mean by that is it's natively issued on Stellar. It has custody capabilities from Bridge, which is part of Stripe. M0 and Fireblocks are also involved on the front of MGUSD. When you were kind of thinking about the stack of providers that you wanted to work with, what were kind of some of the key things that you were looking for? And why did you ultimately design or decide to work with these 4 specific companies?
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything else when you're trying to go into it. You're like, okay, what do we want to own? What are the pieces that we need to scale? And where do we think that we can get economies of scale? Like, for instance, it was almost the same way as when you think about, most companies, when you come in, do we want to write our own word processor? Do we want to create our own spreadsheets? Or do we want to buy something off the shelf? I think what we do know is that the distribution and our connection to the customer is what matters most to us. We are building the core plumbing, the infrastructure within our rails. And then what we wanted to do was connect all of them. I think some of those were chosen because we believe that they have best-in-class technology for what we wanted to do and ownership and as well as speed. And we aligned philosophically, may it be for orchestration or issuance. And then there were others we thought as we scaled and we want to make sure we add more partners. We wanted to connect with many people who are the ones that we felt really good about that we could scale with and would help us be more flexible in terms of our goal of being very open. And then the third piece is that for a lot of this stuff, do they all follow our philosophy of being just as secure as possible? Because that's something we will not compromise of our user information as well as just the security of our network. And I think that based on that, Bridge came out as a great issuance infrastructure and allow us to mint in a way that we want. Fireblocks is really the platform to help us manage our vaults and to orchestrate, the sense of consumer wallet. And what I would say is Stellar's been in partnership with us for a number of years. And we feel comfortable building the consumer wallet on their chain. And M0, really, we like their issuance frameworks just because it aligns with us about thinking about future-proof as we can't answer every question right now. Where can we have the most flexibility? And I think that using their framework seemed like it made the most sense. And that's kind of how they were all chosen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's also been this, maybe shifting gears a tiny bit, but there's been this growing narrative that stablecoins are becoming, institutional financial infrastructure. We've talked about this a lot on this show, especially around settlement, treasury, yields, etc. And this launch feels obviously much more consumer oriented. So do you kind of see the next major phase of stablecoin adoption actually on consumer finance? Or can it be a mix of institutional adoption, consumer finance, and then maybe how does MoneyGram fall into that?
I think they're going to be both. But what I would say is that when we think about MGUSD, for instance, we do see it playing also a big role in our back-end treasury as well in terms of how we pay our vendors and how we partner with them. All for the same reasons we know about stablecoin, really, real-time settlements, low fees, treasury. In fact, on our treasury side, I'm happy to report that since our initiative, we're trading right now on a run rate. We're going to do over $1 billion in trading on stablecoin in our network, and I think that number is only going to go up over time. And as we do more and more trading for people that will accept MGUSD, we're going to push into that as well. Just because I think that there's a lot of benefits there because it lowers our costs, lower their costs, and then it will allow us to pass on those savings to our customers. So I think that the more we get the flywheel going actually on the B2B, the more of MGUSD gets out there in the wild. It helps us solve our customers more because it allows people to say, I want to accept that too. So I think that you can't do one without the other. And I think that some of the folks that have thought about creating their own coin. The issue is they don't have distribution on either side. And it's really tough to say, hey, I'm going to do a consumer coin, and then overnight it's going to be something that is going to be widely adopted. I think, we've seen it where if you start with the consumer side, but don't think through the B2B aspect, what ends up happening is you'll get a lot of peer-to-peer payment potentially, but you won't really have the closed loop infrastructure because you want to have that where it is a B2B2C proposition where on the consumer side, they feed it back into the economy, going back to the business, and then it feeds back into these loops. I think that that's something MoneyGram can help build out. And that's why we're so excited about this. Hopefully, a lot of learnings I'm sharing with you is what we picked up over the last 5 years of doing some things right, doing some things wrong. But overall, I think we're trying to be thoughtful about it and being really purposeful in terms of, MGUSD being purposely built for needs for the consumer, but also for businesses. Hopefully that was not too long.
No, of course not. I think maybe tying that all into on the front of learnings, like you've been operating in this space for a while, especially on the front of MoneyGram, you guys see a lot of different things. So what would you say is something that maybe the crypto industry is still underestimating about how money actually moves around the world, given like your perspective and like what you see internally?
I would say one of the biggest eye openers, I think, that I came into when I came to MoneyGram to appreciate, as well as I think anyone who works on this, is that the technology is not the toughest part actually about building this out. Mm-hmm. It's actually building the right technology, but navigating it around the world where you can make it interoperable within the compliance frameworks and regulatory frameworks of 200 countries and territories. And I think people, a lot of times, maybe the industry starts with a technology, then they look for the problem. And when you built the technology, they haven't thought through how others are going to react. And a lot of times what I would say is that there's a lot of give and take, and you have to build this where it adapts to regulatory frameworks that if you want to bring as many people along, that's just what you need to do. And that's why I think for us, we're trying to balance both, where we're trying to work with all these countries around the world, and we're trying to do it as quickly as we can, taking an approach that we're a tech-first financial technology company. And I think that that's the part that really gets missed. And then the other part is never starting off with a technology to look for a problem to solve, but really starting backwards on what's the problem you're trying to solve. And going back to the payments thing, there are still going to be customers that don't want to use stablecoin. They're going to be the ones that want to use ACH. Someone will still want cash. So how do you build a world where it's inclusive for all of them? And our goal is that we want everyone to have equal access to financial tools that can improve their life. And I think stablecoin provides a really good promise there. And our job is to make it as valuable and as useful as possible. And this is just, like I mentioned, for MGUSD, the first step. And hopefully I'll come back and tell you about all the different use cases that are actually working, in the coming months of how people are actually going to be using MGUSD. But that would be, my goal.
Yeah. Are there any specific use cases you'd like to see that you're like imagining that will come from this?
A really cool case would be people using this for trading collectibles, because I think that would be, one of those hobbies of mine. I love sports memorabilia. And so, a lot of times I think and sometimes they're more costly. So if you can put a smart contract on that, but you can actually give it where the escrow is very short, I think that can be an interesting use case. I do think the use case I'm really excited about what can happen here is if it goes towards, doing payroll, maybe if you can lower the cost of actually doing payroll, maybe you put more money and everyone gets more money at the end of the day. Yeah. Because the administering is lower cost. And then third is just the normal pace of just sending money back home. If we can make this really low cost and really transparent and fast, I think it's, if it lowers our costs, we can lower the costs it takes to send for our customers. And that's the world that honestly I can really get behind. And I think all those use cases are possible. And we'll just have to see how it plays out over the coming weeks or months and quarters.
Amazing. All right. Well, last thing, Anthony, can you leave us with a piece of advice, something that you've carried with you throughout your time in this space or your career?
I would say that when I think about my career, I know for many of us that are type A's that we can come in and say that you got these, these blockers and say, this is what I'm going to do. And for me to achieve this, I can't think about anything else. And I think that as I've matured, but especially as I think about the mission of our company, you have to do something that's very purposeful, that aligns with your values. And I do think if you can do that, there's a lot of times where you can be really successful, and you can do really well financially, but also do good for the world. And I think that that's the thing that I think part of DeFi that really is rewarding and thing I'm excited about, and providing and democratizing access to the world while giving more access to people that might not have it is the reason I came to MoneyGram. And I think as an advice is that, you can do good for yourself as well as do good for the world and the communities that you live in.
Yeah, I love it. Amazing. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. Really fun.
Yeah.